The desert wind of the Sinai whips dust across the archaeological dig site at Kuntalet Ajrud, a solitary, sun-scorched ruin from the 8th century BCE. The air is thick with anticipation and the dry scent of ancient earth. A team of Israeli archaeologists, led by Ze'ev Meshel in the mid-1970s, carefully brushes away the sediment of millennia from two enormous storage jars known as pithoi. The surfaces are adorned with crude but unmistakable drawings, figures with lyres, a seated woman, a procession of worshippers. But it is the inscriptions, scrawled in an early Hebrew script, that will send shockwaves through the worlds of theology and history. One phrase, repeated with slight variations, stops everyone in their tracks. It reads, "Yahweh and his Asherah." A stunned silence falls over the dig, broken only by the whistling wind. Here, etched into clay, is the seemingly undeniable evidence of God having a wife. This single discovery challenges the very bedrock of Western monotheism, the belief in one, singular, and indivisible God. For centuries, biblical scholars and religious authorities had interpreted the numerous references to Asherah in the Hebrew Bible as condemnations of a foreign, pagan idol, a seductive lure that led the Israelites astray from their true faith. The Bible is replete with commands to cut down her Asherah poles and destroy her altars. These passages were read as proof of a clear and ancient demarcation between the pure worship of Yahweh and the corrupting influence of Canaanite polytheism. But this inscription, found in a remote Israelite or Judahite outpost, complicates that narrative immensely. It wasn't written by a Canaanite, but by a worshipper of Yahweh. It doesn't present Asherah as a rival, but as a partner. This finding, later bolstered by a similar inscription discovered at Hirbet el-Kom in Judah, suggests that for a significant period in ancient Israel, Yahweh was not worshipped alone. He was part of a divine pair. To understand the magnitude of this, we must step back into the world of the ancient Near East. The Israelites did not emerge in a vacuum. They were, in their earliest history, culturally Canaanite. The chief god of the Canaanite pantheon was El, and his divine consort was the great mother goddess, Asherah, also known as Lady Asherah of the Sea. She was a figure of immense power, associated with fertility, wisdom, and cosmic order. As the worship of a local storm and warrior deity named Yahweh grew in prominence among the tribes of Israel and Judah, it seems he began to assume the attributes of the high god El. And in doing so, he also appears to have inherited El's wife. This wasn't an isolated cult. Archaeological evidence for the worship of a goddess, likely Asherah, is widespread throughout the region in the form of countless female pillar figurines found in domestic settings. This suggests her veneration was a deeply embedded, popular part of everyday Israelite religious life, from the family home to official shrines. The God of the Bible, it seems, had a divine queen. This forces us to reread the Bible not as a monolithic history, but as a document of religious and political struggle. The vehement condemnations of Asherah by prophets like Jeremiah and the scribes behind the book of Deuteronomy can be seen in a new light. They are not just describing a foreign threat. They are evidence of a fierce internal conflict, a civil war of theology. A powerful faction, likely centered in the Jerusalem priesthood and royal court during the reforms of King Josiah in the late 7th century BCE, sought to purify the faith. Their goal was to centralize worship in the Jerusalem temple and to forge a unique national identity around a single, transcendent, and exclusively male deity. This theological project had a political dimension. A unified faith in one God could unify a fragile nation. In this process, Asherah had to be demoted from divine consort to detestable idol. Her sacred poles were to be burned, her name vilified, and her memory erased from the official record. This was a deliberate campaign to suppress her worship, a secret war, waged not on a battlefield, but within the religious consciousness of a nascent faith. The struggle was to define who God was, and just as importantly, who God wasn't. Specifically, not a deity with a female partner who represented the sacredness of nature, fertility, and immanent divinity. What does it mean for a foundational religious narrative to have such a significant suppressed chapter? The Kuntalet Ajrud inscription is a voice from the dust, a testament to a faith more complex and diverse than we ever imagined. It reveals that monotheism was not a sudden revelation, but a long, contested evolution with winners and losers. The victory of a singular masculine image of God had profound and lasting consequences, shaping not only theology, but also our understanding of gender, power, and humanity's relationship with the natural world. This revelation forces us to question the selective preservation of history and the deliberate erasure of the divine feminine. How does the absence of a female divine figure at the very heart of the Western spiritual imagination shape our societies, our families, and our inner lives today? And if God's queen was so successfully erased, were there other powerful figures who met a similar fate? Building on the startling archaeological evidence of Yahweh's consort, Asherah, we turn from the sun-baked desert to the hushed, climate-controlled archives of a university library. Here, a scholar, under the soft glow of a reading lamp, pores over a fragile medieval manuscript. This is the Hiakat, a satirical and often scandalous collection of Jewish folklore compiled sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries CE. Within its pages lies the most explicit account of a figure who haunts the margins of Scripture, Lilith, Adam's rebellious first wife. The text details a dramatic confrontation in the Garden of Eden. Adam, insisting on his superiority, demands that Lilith lie beneath him during intercourse. She furiously retorts, "Why should I lie beneath you? I also was made from dust and am therefore your equal." When Adam tries to force her, Lilith, in a final act of defiance, utters the ineffable, magical name of God, sprouts wings, and flies away from Eden and from him forever. This isn't just a forgotten fairy tale, it's a radical alternative to the Genesis narrative, a story of a divine rebellion that occurred even before the famous fall. While the Contra Hazah provides the most detailed narrative, the legend of Lilith has far more ancient roots. Her name first appears in the shadows of Mesopotamian demonology, in texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a Lilith is a wind spirit or a night demon who preys on men and children. This sinister figure was absorbed into Jewish folklore, appearing briefly in the Babylonian Talmud as a long-haired night spirit one should avoid. But her transformation into Adam's first wife is a stroke of rabbinic genius, an attempt to solve a perplexing biblical contradiction. The book of Genesis contains two distinct and conflicting accounts of creation. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it states plainly, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." This implies a simultaneous and therefore equal creation. However, in Genesis chapter 2, the story changes dramatically. God first creates Adam from dust, and only later, seeing his loneliness, forms Eve from one of Adam's ribs, positioning her as a secondary creation, a helper. For centuries, commentators wondered, what happened to the first woman, the one from Genesis 1? The legend of Lilith emerged to fill this narrative gap. She is the woman created as Adam's equal, and her story explains her absence from the rest of the biblical account. She was too rebellious to tolerate, too independent to control, and so she had to be replaced by the more compliant Eve. Lilith's subsequent fate is as revealing as her origin. After fleeing Eden, the story goes, God sends 3 angels to bring her back, but she refuses. As punishment, she is condemned to have 100 of her demonic children die every day. In retaliation, she vows to attack human infants, who can only be protected by an amulet bearing the names of the 3 angels. In this, Lilith is transformed. She is not merely a disobedient wife. She is demonized, cast as a baby killer, a seductress, a figure of pure chaotic evil. Her independence, her sexual autonomy, and her assertion of equality are not just rejected, they are rendered monstrous. This narrative functions as a powerful tool of social control, a cautionary tale against female defiance within a patriarchal religious framework. She becomes the archetype of the dangerous woman, the embodiment of everything a good woman, like the submissive Eve, should not be. The secret war waged against Lilith was not one of archaeological erasure, like that of Asherah, but one of character assassination. Her story was allowed to survive, but only in a twisted form, as a warning. It was a war of narrative control, fought to define the proper, divinely ordained role for women and the terrifying consequences of refusing it. Yet, a story this powerful cannot be entirely controlled. In the mystical traditions of Kabbalah, particularly in the Zohar, Lilith evolves into a more complex and cosmically significant figure. She becomes the queen of the demonic realm, a dark counterpart to the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God in the world. She represents the untamed, dangerous aspects of the divine feminine, the raw power of the earth and the erotic that could not be fully integrated into the patriarchal system. And in the 20th and 21st centuries, this demonized figure has been spectacularly reclaimed. Feminist thinkers and theologians, beginning in the 1970s, saw in Lilith not a monster, but a hero. The Jewish feminist magazine, Lilith, founded in 1976, is a testament to her modern resurrection. For many today, she is a symbol of female empowerment, spiritual independence, and the courage to refuse a subordinate role, no matter the cost. Her defiant cry, "We are equal," echoes through the centuries, resonating with contemporary struggles for gender justice within and beyond religious institutions. How does the enduring myth of Lilith, a figure banished for asserting her equality, continue to challenge traditional interpretations of gender and power within faith? Does her story, preserved in the shadows, offer a key to understanding the deeper societal anxieties surrounding female autonomy that persist even today? From Lilith's defiant flight from Eden and the archaeological whispers of Asherah on an ancient shard of pottery, we begin to discern a larger, more profound pattern. This is not about two isolated figures, but about a systemic, multi-millennial effort, a secret war on heaven waged not with swords and celestial battles, but with scripture, dogma, and the careful curation of collective memory, all of which systematically marginalized, demonized, or erased the divine feminine. We find ourselves now at a vibrant interfaith conference on eco-feminist theology. The room is filled with a diverse assembly of scholars, activists, priests, and spiritual seekers. A theologian stands at the podium, her voice resonating with passion. Behind her, an image of the many-breasted Artemis of Ephesus, an ancient symbol of nourishment and untamed nature, is projected beside a modern, abstract depiction of Sophia, the Greek word for divine wisdom, often personified as female in biblical texts. The war wasn't just against goddesses, she declares, her words capturing the rapt attention of the audience. It was a war against an entire worldview. It was against the principle of balance, of immanence, the idea of God being the world, not just above it. It was a war against the sacredness of the earth, the body, and the feminine spirit that resides within us all. A murmur of agreement and recognition ripples through the room. This is not just history. For those gathered here, it is a living, urgent reality. The suppression of female deities and the corresponding elevation of an exclusively male divine was not a single event, but a slow, creeping revolution tied to profound shifts in human society. Many historians and anthropologists like Marija Gimbutas and Rianne Eisler have theorized that early human societies, particularly Neolithic agricultural communities, were often more matricentric, their spiritual lives centered on powerful goddesses of fertility, creation, and regeneration. The earth itself was the ultimate womb, the source of all life. However, with the rise of nomadic pastoralism, the invention of the plow, the consolidation of city-states, and the glorification of organized warfare, social structures began to shift dramatically towards patriarchy. Religion, as it so often does, mirrored and reinforced this change. The sky gods, powerful, distant, law-giving, and male, began to conquer, absorb, or subordinate the earth goddesses. Creation stories were rewritten. In the Babylonian, the male god Marduk slays the primordial mother goddess Tiamat, splitting her body in two to create the heavens and the earth. This is the secret war in its most mythic, violent form, the imposition of a masculine order upon a feminine chaos. This theological restructuring had immense, world-shaping consequences. It created a sacred hierarchy, God over humanity, humanity over nature, man over woman. Spirit was separated from body, heaven from earth, intellect from intuition. This ancient war continues to cast a long shadow, its echoes reverberating in our most pressing modern crises. When the divine is conceived as exclusively male and transcendent, outside of and above the natural world, it can create a spiritual framework that permits the exploitation of the earth, which is demoted to mere raw material. The ecological crisis, from this perspective, is a spiritual crisis, a direct consequence of our divorce from the sacred feminine and the immanent divinity of creation. This is why the reclamation of these forgotten figures is more than just a historical or theological exercise. Modern movements seeking to reclaim the divine feminine, whether it's the neo-pagan revival of goddess spirituality, Christian feminists reinterpreting the figure of Sophia, or Jewish mystics exploring the Kabbalistic concept of the Shekinah, the indwelling female presence of God, are engaged in a profound act of spiritual and cultural healing. They are not simply trying to add a goddess to the existing pantheon. They are attempting to rewire our very understanding of divinity, to foster a spirituality that is more inclusive, embodied, ecological, and balanced. They argue that acknowledging the secret war that erased these figures is the first step toward healing the deep wounds it inflicted on our relationship with the planet, with each other, and with ourselves. The journey that began with a dusty inscription on a jar has led us here, to the heart of a modern spiritual revolution. The unearthing of God's banned queen is not a threat to faith, but an invitation to a deeper, more whole version of it. It asks us to consider what has been lost, what has been silenced, and what we might regain by listening to these ancient, powerful voices. Rediscovering the divine feminine is a quest to restore balance, not just in our concept of heaven, but in the way we live here on earth. This investigation reveals that the past is never truly past. It is a living presence that, when re-examined, holds the potential to reshape our future.